Hi everyone. Welcome to your very first audio lecture for KIN 355 for summer 2018, besides the syllabus video, of course, but this is the first one that has, course material. So I would like to remind you of a couple of things before we get started here. First and foremost, I'm just doing a Camtasia screen capture. So this is unedited. You'll find that I probably speak very informally, but the purpose of this is so that you can, listen to some additional thoughts and some additional explanations of the material that is on the slides. I don't think slides by themselves are going to help you really learn too much. So this course really is a combination of the reading of the textbook for this topic, listening to this. Hopefully I can, infuse a couple of interesting thoughts into some of the materials, and then of course review of slides, and putting that all together to really think about these issues. So I just want to let you know that there is no editing, and it'll be pretty informal, and hopefully, you won't hear too much noise in the background as we go along. Also, you're going to see that as we go along, there will be hyperlinks to things on the internet. You cannot, actually, not just probably, you cannot click on those in the audio because it is just a screen capture, like I said, through Camtasia. That's why I'm providing you both the slides and the audio of me recording over the slides. So to click into any hyperlinks, you'll need to go into the PowerPoint slides that are posted that say slides only on iLearn. Okay, so without further ado, this is our introduction, if you will, into ethics. And of course, ours is ethics in physical activity and health. And I take a very, very applied approach. Ethics is a branch of philosophy. And so I'll go to the first slide here. It can be very complicated. Philosophy itself is often complicated because of its kind of abstract nature and its complexity, and just humans in general applying certain thoughts and beliefs in ways that are very different. And so it can be a very cumbersome topic and maybe even overwhelming. What I really try to do is keep this very applied. And I hope that you'll notice that we're going to just pretty much dive into some examples and pick those apart a bit. Now, of course, we have to start with some definitions and kind of think of some introductory type considerations. But what I want you to be able to do, the purpose, is at the end of this course, I want you to be able to think fully and critically about some of these issues while you're going to have to make decisions about them. And usually it's going to be decisions about next steps or actions. And what I mean by that is, at the end of this slideshow, we'll talk about decision making, and I'll give you a couple examples. Like if you're a physical therapist or a PE teacher, how does this pop up? What does it look like? And then how can you handle it? That's what I want you to take from this course, is how can you think critically about these issues and then comfortably, maybe uncomfortably, but make decisions regarding your actions. Sometimes we're guided by legality or legal issues or law, and we are bound by that. But sometimes there's things in gray areas. So anyways, ethics itself is a branch of philosophy concerning moral considerations. But how people reach conclusions about their morals is completely subjective. For instance, some people are religious, and so they have a belief of a higher power, and their code of conduct comes from that higher power, or through the holy text that is from that higher power. And that's totally up to them. Whereas others may take a more I don't want to say supernatural, but like human approach, where they're making their decisions for what's based on the greater good. We'll talk about that here in a little bit. So how you reach conclusions is very subjective. It's not typically, unless you're an ethical philosopher, it's not something that you do real systematically. However, ethics itself is defined. Here's the definition. Ethics is guided by society and are a series of systematic beliefs. So in this case, when we're talking about ethics, we're actually not talking about personal belief. We're talking about society. And that's a really important consideration here. As you can imagine, as long as humans have interacted with one another, ethical issues have popped up, and humans have had to deal with those issues. But really, ethics is a societal belief. So for instance, in the U.S., we'll talk about this here in a second, but in the U.S., revenge killings and honor killings are considered still illegal. Like, you cannot kill somebody even if they killed your daughter. Or you cannot kill someone because, like an honor killing, you believe that they've dishonored your family. That is, in the U.S., unacceptable to most of us. But in other countries, that is not necessarily the case. And so ethics are societal and are a series of systematic beliefs. Just really think about that definition as you go along here. If you go up to a person on the street, though, for most people, when you ask them what ethics means to them, it usually means the decision between right and wrong, or what's right, what's wrong, right versus wrong. And that's actually, it seems really simple, but it's not. It's really not, and this is why ethics can get so complicated, is, what does right and wrong mean? I want you to think about that. And so in reflection paper 1, which is actually due tomorrow, Tuesday, July 3rd, or I'm sorry, so look in your syllabus for the due date on that. Your reflection paper 1 is definitely going to be asking you to dig deeper into what does right and wrong mean. Going back to that example I had earlier, if you say murder, which would be the taking of another life or killing somebody, we would say that that's universally wrong. But there are some examples where perhaps in society it's not necessarily considered wrong. For instance, what if you are defending yourself? Self-defense. In the U.S., there are plenty of cases in which self-defense has not been considered murder, even if you have taken someone else's life. So in that instance, maybe it's not wrong. Maybe it is still wrong. That's, like I said, up to you to decide. But as far as our society goes, sometimes self-defense is not considered murder. And then the examples I used earlier about revenge killings, a revenge killing would be something like the old saying, eye for an eye. And these are difficult situations. There's no doubt that they're tough because, if somebody does take the life of someone that you love, you can, or I shouldn't say you can, but people have retaliated against those individuals and harmed them, and they are still held liable for murder in our society, oftentimes, depending on the situation, of course. Honor killings are a little different, though, and I've hyperlinked here just to a CBS article that gives you an example of an honor killing, where this would be in some societies or groups of people. It doesn't have to be an entire society, but groups of people. Oftentimes, honor killings are killings of women or girls who have dishonored the family in some way. Dating the wrong person, for instance, is the article that I linked here too. So in the U.S., again, these are absolutely considered wrong. Um, and they most certainly could be and are, depending on your own beliefs. I'm just saying that these are often not considered murder, as far as from a legal standpoint. And I think that's one more consideration here. The law and ethics are actually different. However, our ethical beliefs influence our laws. And so laws are often a reflection of what we believe, but not for everybody. Abortion, we'll talk about that later on. Very hot button issue, that goes without saying, I suppose, but a very contentious issue that, for some people, our laws are wrong, which for in most states it's decided by the states, but most states abortion is allowed up to a certain point in a pregnancy. Well, some people would say that is flat out not okay. So that's why these are different. Ethics and law are different. But again, I'll just reiterate that many times in societies, the laws reflect the ethical beliefs of that society. So they are separate, but you must talk about them. You often talk about them hand in hand, but they are different. Okay, back to these examples here about right versus wrong, if you will. I'd like to take it to a healthcare example. So think about this. What if there was a disease that killed about 30% of its victims, and the rest, so 30% is a very high mortality rate for a disease, and the rest who recovered were permanently disfigured or blind. So this is bad. This is very, very bad disease. But also, there's a known vaccine, and the World Health Organization, the WHO, has a plan to distribute it. However, the vaccine itself, because of side effects, would kill hundreds of thousands if we vaccinated everyone in the world. Think about that for a minute. What would you do? So we have a very virulent disease, could kill a lot of people, disfigure and blind the others. We have a vaccine, but we know that if we vaccinated millions of people, we would have about 100,000 people die, or more. This is just a scenario. Would you accept the death of 100,000 people? Again, I'm just throwing that number out arbitrarily. Would you accept that number of deaths, knowing that you could get rid of a disease? Very tough situation. So just answer that question. What would you do? Would you vaccinate, or would you let people decide? Well, guess what? This is a real scenario. This really happened. This is smallpox. So smallpox is actually is the only disease that we have eradicated. When you eradicate a disease, that means it is no longer a threat, or I shouldn't say threat, no longer present in society. We do have smallpox in labs, in a couple different labs around the world, and we have not destroyed them, interestingly enough. But anyways, long time. So we eradicated smallpox, I believe it was in 1980 or so, maybe 81. Let me see what year that was. So the last known natural case for smallpox was in 1977, and then it was declared eradicated in 1980. I was correct. I just wanted to look that up really quick, so I was right on my timeline. So anyways, there was someone who I believe died after that, but she worked at the CDC in the early 80s. So that's what I mean by natural case, 1977. Okay, so anyways, long story short, we did in fact, the World Health Organization did in fact decide to vaccinate everybody that they possibly could vaccinate, knowing that some people would die from the side effects or the reactions. And that happened. So we did in fact have people die, probably on the order of a couple 100,000. But smallpox was eradicated. There were some other issues, though, certainly, with the smallpox vaccinations. As the World Health Organization went into a lot of third world countries to do the vaccination, there was probably some unethical behavior in terms of deception or persuasion, if you will, to get everyone vaccinated. So even people who didn't want the vaccine were vaccinated. And so that can be another ethical issue. But this is one thing that actually happened. And, happened within maybe your parents' really lifetime. Your parents were probably born, prior to 1977. So this happened during their lifetime. So what they did was so when you made that decision, if you were at the World Health Organization, you made the decision that it was better to eradicate the disease, even though you knew that some people were going to die. They took the good old Vulcan philosophy, if you will, which is the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Now, that's actually called utilitarianism, that we'll talk about here in a second. But it is the Vulcan philosophy. So you Star Trek fans out there, Vulcans would say that's okay. Vulcans would say that, yeah, we are going to accept that some people are going to die, but we're going to eradicate a disease. It's also the decision that Harry S. Truman and his administration made when they dropped the atom bomb on Japan. Obviously World War II, what we're talking about here is of course, they believed that, yes, we're going to kill a lot of people, but it's going to save more lives in the end. We're going to end this war. And so that is very much taking the needs of the many in their viewpoint and outweighing the needs of the few. In that case, it wasn't a few at all, but it certainly was they believed that by ending the war, they were saving more lives. So this approach, which is really called utilitarianism, is used a lot in ethical decision making. Individuals make decisions, though, right? And so, as I mentioned already earlier, individuals make decisions based on typically what I would call a personal value system. And you develop this personal value system a variety of ways. It may be religion. It may be how you grew up, right? Your socioeconomic conditions at the time. Not just growing up, but across your life. Your family, your friends. So, for instance, perhaps you used to be against gay marriage, and then you have a friend who was gay and wanted to get married, and they were very close to you, and you decided that that was not a good decision or a good belief, and so you may have beliefs change over time. And so, you may have family and friends that influence that. That's just one very, obviously one random example. Where you live may influence your decisions, your cultural heritage and your traditions, and this list could go on and on. So how you develop your personal value system is very individualistic. But if you think about how you've developed your personal value system, I bet some of these come into play. Conscience. A lot of people talk about conscience when they're talking about ethics, but that's different than a personal value system. This is almost, conscience is different than ethics. Conscience, for most people, is an inner voice. So what you think about your beliefs and actions, right? The thoughts that you have about your individual beliefs and actions. And this is very subjective, very non-scientific in terms of sometimes people just say things like, that just doesn't feel right. And it's just because it's not scientific doesn't mean it doesn't have value in that instance. And that's another way that ethics is very different, is that sometimes people just don't feel like something is right. That is conscience. But that is not ethics. Ethics are guided by society and are a series of systematic beliefs. I just wanted to throw that out there because as you start to reflect, I think on, especially reflection paper 1, you're probably going to start thinking about some of these things like conscience. What is right versus wrong may come down to how you just feel about it, which is very subjective. I'm going to give you a little history here, just a few influences, because there are many, many influences on ethical reasoning. One of the earliest, probably the most famous, I would say, amongst just everyday people is Confucius. And Confucius was born, he's Chinese, 552 BC. And he was a real teacher, if you will, and thought very deeply about issues. That was not necessarily okay in early China. And so he was actually, a lot of these early influences actually were shunned and imprisoned. And really, he did a lot of, like I said, teaching, but he really wasn't a name while he was alive. So he died in 479 BC. It was after his death that people started to really pay attention to the things that he was saying or said. Confucius has a ton of quotes. If you Google it, most of them are probably not right, just because I think Confucius gets lots of quotes put to his name. But he has tons of quotes no matter what. For instance, choose a job you love and you'll never have to work a day in your life. That was Confucius. Socrates is actually typically considered the father of democracy and the father of modern day ethics. And so he was Greek. He was actually born about the time that Confucius had died, so 470 BC. He's really interesting because he was a really great teacher, but he actually never wrote anything down. His proteges, if you will, were the ones that started to record things that they had learned from him. So he actually was a thinker and a teacher, and he is credited with the teaching method that we call the Socratic method, which is teaching with questions. And so he would bring people together to talk, usually in an outdoor environment. And he would do this and just ask questions and start to probe. And we use this a lot in ethics. Like if we were in class, face to face, the Socratic method, I use the Socratic method all the time. It's not my job to tell you what's ethical, what's right, what's wrong. And so a lot of times I'll just ask questions. And that's Socratic. He, like Confucius, was not accepted very well in society. He was accused of corrupting young minds and impiety. And so he was sentenced to death by hemlock, so poisoning essentially. And so Socrates, like I said, the Socratic method here, I have a bullet point for that, and that's teaching by asking questions. And the point of it is to really get you to just start to think in a deeper, more meaningful way. Not just saying, well, I believe this because. It's kind of digging deeper than that. He was also credited with inductive reasoning. So critical thinking, it's the critical thinking process where you're looking at details and then you move to big general ideas, big ideas. The opposite of that would be deductive reasoning, which is Sherlock Holmes, right? Very popular for his deductive reasoning. He's a deductivist, where he starts with these big clues or ideas, and then he's able to get down to the specific details. So it's almost opposite. So that's Socrates. Plato, actually, sorry, let me go back here. Plato, I don't have a slide for him, but he was actually Socrates' protege. So I'm sure you've heard of Plato. Plato did write things down, and we still have his documents today. And so Plato continued this work, and like I said, was the one that wrote everything down. So kind of shifting gears here is we're going to start now thinking about major areas of ethical philosophy. Overall, and this is why I like the textbook as well, the one that we've chosen for this class, is it keeps things kind of focused. So we've got metaethics, normative ethics, which can be broken down further, and applied ethics. So we'll go through each of these. So metaethics tries to understand the nature of ethics and the source. So these are the big questions. These are really often intense questions. For instance, what is the meaning of life? Why are we here? Those are big, crazy questions. And that would be, if you're trying to answer those questions, you're trying to do metaethics. At a more ethical level, though, if we're going to take it to a more ethical example, you wouldn't, for example, decide what's right and wrong, but you would decide what the terms right and wrong really mean. And so you're going to practice that in your reflection paper. So these are big questions. These are big questions. Think about that when you think metaethics. Normative ethics, on the other hand, have 3 strategies. Normative ethics is when you have standards by which right and wrong are determined. A good example of normative ethics is the Golden Rule. So the Golden Rule being, of course, treat others as you would want to be treated, or some form of that definition. So what you do there is you make decisions for how to act by reflecting on how you would want other people to act to you. So the 3 strategies are virtue-based, consequential, and duty-based. Virtue-based is you make your decisions based on your corresponding value system. So for instance, if you believe, so let's say you have a religious belief that that conception is the beginning of life, meaning when sperm and egg meet, that is the beginning of life. With that then belief, your value choice then would likely be that you would be against abortion. Not necessarily, but I'm just, again, throwing out an example here. So if you believe that life begins when the sperm and egg meet, chances are you would be against abortion. So that would be a very virtue-based choice. And Plato really believed in this. And so his teachings looked at 4 main traits. He said wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice were the 4 main traits, and that you should make your value judgments based on those 4 items, for lack of diving too deep into Plato here. So virtue-based, corresponding value system. The consequential approach is actually what we talked about earlier. Decisions are based on what will bring about the best balance of good over bad. So this is utilitarianism. Utilitarianism is decisions should be based on what is best for the majority. The Vulcan philosophy again. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. That is a great example of utilitarianism. And like I said, we make lots of decisions this way. And I should also mention right now also that you may not subscribe to just one of these. You may decide throughout your life that you're going to apply utilitarianism to some decisions, where you'll apply the virtue-based in others, and how you come to those conclusions is up to you. But the point here is to recognize how you make those decisions. And this is definitely, utilitarianism is definitely one that we see a lot in healthcare. The needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. And finally, duty-based it's also called deontology or rights-based ethics. And here, it's where you're now looking at the individual. So the individual rights are most important. So what is best for the individual cannot be precluded by what is best for the greater good. Meaning, in the smallpox example, if someone was against being vaccinated for whatever reason, that's more important than what's best for the greater good. So it's not necessarily complete opposite, but it is very, it's in contrast to utilitarianism. So this is all about individual rights. And as I mentioned, you may think about this. Think about how you, what you believe about perhaps some of these ethics issues as we go along, and then how you came to those conclusions. Is it duty-based? Is it virtue-based? Or is it utilitarianism? Chances are that you've applied all of these in some way, somehow. And then applied ethics, this is definitely where we're going to spend our time, is the investigation of any given debate over a morally based issue. And so for an ethical dilemma, to be an ethical dilemma, it has to be controversial, meaning there has to be more than one viewpoint, and it needs to be classified as a moral issue. In health, this could include things like abortion, euthanasia, assisted suicide, stem cell research, I go on and on, performance-enhancing drugs, and we're going to talk about all of them, actually. So we're going to apply some of these things to these issues. So here's why, I've said it already at the beginning, and like I said, this is a very informal kind of lecture, if you will. The entire healthcare profession and the services that you provide are going to be based on decisions. You're going to have to make decisions all day long. Some are very easy, some are very mundane, but others may pose some ethical dilemmas to you. And you don't have to be in the field for long to recognize these. So let me give you a couple of examples. So as if you're going to be a physical therapist, and let's say you're treating a high schooler. Let's say they're 15, 16, doesn't really matter. They're in high school. And you've been treating them for a while. They have a pretty bad injury. And so you happen to see the coach out and about, you know each other from just being in the same area. And they start asking you about this particular athlete. And they start asking you some pretty specific questions, like the extent of their injuries, how long it'll return to play, and other questions. And that doesn't seem like a big deal, at first. But just stop and think about that for a second. So you are a healthcare provider treating a minor, and now somebody else is asking you about their condition. What would you do? Let me give you another example, and then I'll give you some tools. Let's say you're a PE teacher, and you're teaching like seniors. So potentially you have adults and you have an 18-year-old student whose mother calls you and asks you to discuss their 18-year-old student's weight. The student is clearly overweight, perhaps not performing very well, very out of shape, maybe low fitness. And so the parent calls you as the PE teacher and wants some help on how they can slim down. Okay, think about that for a second. Here's a great tool that you can use when you're confronted with some of these issues. It's the one that your textbook presents, and that's another reason why I really like the textbook, is because of this ethical decision-making model. So first of all, it has to go in this order. Is it legal? So if something is illegal, that is actually very easy to get out of. You can just tell somebody that's not legal. Is it balanced? The easiest way to think about this is, does something seem extreme to you? I know that's not real easy to explain, but I'm hoping we're going to go back to the examples here in a second. That might be a little bit more clear. And the number 3 is very subjective, right? It's that conscience almost. How does it make me feel? That can actually be part of your decision-making model. So let's go back. The PT. Your PT and the patient's coach asks you about their condition and how long it's going to take them to return, etc., etc. You go through those numbers, 1, 2, 3. Number 1, is it legal? No. So the answer to this one is kind of easy. We haven't talked about it yet, but you will learn this semester or this session about HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Protection Act. And HIPAA bars you as a healthcare provider from sharing any personally identifiable health information with someone who has not been cleared by the patient. So you can only share health information with the patient, or if they have in writing put down someone else, it could be their coach if they wanted, but they have to give permission for anyone else to see their records. Now, this is a case of a minor, so their parents actually are fine. Their parents can have their health information, but anyone outside of that cannot. So is it legal? No. And as a physical therapist, then you could probably do some general, oh, they're doing good, that kind of thing. I think they're doing great, working real hard. But if they're talking about specifics, then you as a PT have to say, I because of HIPAA, I can't discuss that level of detail with you. The second one is a little bit different. So is it illegal to talk about somebody's weight? Probably not. So a mother calls and asks to discuss their student's weight. That's not really illegal. So we'll go to the second one. Is it balanced? Well, I don't know. That's up for debate. You kind of have to get more info, I suppose. What's the purpose? Is it for their health? The parent says they want to help them slim down. Why? So is it balanced? Let's just say that, okay, the parent just really wants some help, some guidance. And you can do that. You could probably do that. You could probably say, here's some general resources, send them to, myplate.gov, send them to acsm.org to read about exercise and things like that. You can give them resources. Number 3, how does it make you feel? That one I think is a little harder for me. Clearly this is someone who's struggling with their weight. That's probably not easy for them. And, for me, this is just me, I would probably answer that parent by saying, hey, can we bring in the student to all meet together? Because for me, how does that make me feel? Makes me feel like I'm a little bit behind their back as the student. And I'm hoping that the parent is only looking out for their health, but you never know. So, that's an example where you're going to go through each of these questions and kind of think about it in a more full way, right? So there you go. There's your first set of tools for ethical decision making, and it's also the end of our first set of lecture slides. So now you may go back to the slides at any time, the slides only, and you can click on any links that were in this PowerPoint. I think there was only one. You can always re-listen or do whatever you like, and then you should also be reading the chapter that corresponds with this set of lecture slides, which happens to be chapter 1, I believe. So have a good one, and keep working hard and stay up to date